Okay, listeners, thank you so much for joining me today. My guest today is Theresa Bruno. She is a celebrity jewelry designer whose clients included Oprah and Michelle Obama. She is the host of the Soul Talks podcast and the author of her book, He's Not Coming Back, which came out in April of this year. And she knows that rebirth doesn't come easy. After her husband's suicide shattered her world, she turned her loss into a powerful journey of healing, sharing raw, real tools to help others let go and step forward. From defiant gratitude to nature's quiet magic, Teresa's story is a lifeline for anyone craving renewal and sorrow. So, Teresa, thank you so much for joining me today. Is there anything else you'd like to tell us about yourself?
Well, first, I'm just so grateful to be on your show. So thank you for having me. And, we have some similarities in our grief journey. Yours is a powerful one as well. And so I appreciate, I'm 5 years out and you're 20 something years out from suffering the suicide of a spouse. And, I just so appreciate what you're putting out in the world. And one of the things that became important to me about 3 years after my husband died was, as you have said, to make some sense of it. And I think a lot of us surviving major tragedies do try to, uh, shift it into something positive. Why did this happen to me? How can I change to make some sense of, not necessarily change, but rewrite my story to make some sense of it? But it's not the easiest thing, in the world to do, to begin to share your pain. So I just first and foremost want to say, Christine, you're amazing in
Oh,
what you have done.
thank you.
You
I get so much out of what I do that is internal for me. So it's like it's not just a selfless thing. It's very I love what I do. I feel like I'm in a space I'm supposed to be in.
Well, you're helping so many people, and I, am empowered just listening to your story, and, I love where your children are, and that gives me a lot of encouragement and hope for what I'm doing with my kids, and so just thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you for the good work you do in the world.
Thank you. So tell us a bit about your story. So you and your husband were married for how long? You had kids?
Yeah, all the things, one marriage, for both of us, and, he was my peas and carrots. He was my very best friend, and, he was my advocate. He applauded. I'm a serial entrepreneur and, he just bless his heart. He just, from the time we were very young, I was very driven and he was just always alongside, had two boys, and I thought we had a storybook life.
Yeah.
Like you, I came from a background of pretty severe childhood abuse and being moved around a lot and just things that had so much determination about
Mhm.
um, living differently as an adult
Yeah.
and finding a relationship where I could grow old with that person and create a space for my kids that would be safe and would be fun. Um, and I thought we were doing that. I thought we had done that. But yes, after 29 years, my precious best friend husband took his life. And my life, as I knew it, ended that day. Everything I thought I had built, everything I valued, not everything. I mean, I was a spiritual person before. I'm on a deep spiritual path now,
Mhm.
but that spiritual path has changed.
Sure.
Um, but things like, and we talked about this earlier before the show, I was a very driven person. Success was one of the ways I'm sure, working hard was one of the ways that I said, I'm enough.
Mhm.
I'm okay. No matter what happened to me back there, this makes me feel like I'm enough.
Mhm.
And, and then, as a young woman with two little kids and this fabulous husband, and, I got wrapped up in the things that we often get wrapped up in, what car are we driving? What house do we have? What school are the kids going to? Who's in the best mommy group, just that doesn't even matter. But but all the things that kind of the trappings of success mattered to me. And I thought it was because I was smart and that I worked hard and I was living life well. And that wasn't really at all what that was about.
Mhm.
So when James died, that was one of the biggest things began to shift for me. And I'll backtrack a minute for your listeners because I think it's really important to talk about some of the emotions that happen in grief and what holds us back and what gets us stuck.
Mhm.
One of the ways that I was striving and running and working more hours than I should have been, I'd had a very successful regional marketing company for a long time, and it was just a princess of a business. It just ran really well. Um, I was very proud of what I did as a woman, singly owned business, no debt on it. But somewhere along the line, I got bored and I decided to open another business. And that was a Cinderella business. I had not been trained in the jewelry design business. I've always been in the world of the arts, I've always been creative. And I was the creative nexus for that marketing firm. But the jewelry business just came out of the gate. It's a story that would take your whole podcast for me to tell, but I was on the front page of the New York Times Styles section before I was even incorporated. I mean, I couldn't even, you can't pay to get that press, you know? And Mrs. Obama read about it and wanted to wear the jewelry, and then 50 stores wanted it. I didn't even have any jewelry, it took off that way. And I had that business for 12 years, but I had to close it. I had to shutter the business after 12 years due to just awful case of fraud. And I tell that story, and that happened, and we were in the processes of closing the business, had 2 salons of my own, one in Birmingham, one in Houston, and I was in stores all over the US and a few in Europe, and we were in the process of shutting everything down, and it took about 10 months. And so that was all done and completed in February of 2020. And in March of 2020, COVID was announced.
Mhm.
So 2 things were happening inside of me. One was I carried so much shame coming out of the closure of that business. I couldn't, it was the first big thing I'd failed at in a
Mm.
really huge public way. I got a lot of bad press on social media. Um, it was a very public closing. I couldn't believe I had let everybody down who had, just boosted me up and helped me have this Cinderella, kind of success. And I also think as a woman in business, we carry what we perceive as our failures in a way that sometimes guys don't. I would see, would go talk to multiple people who had had fraud cases, and they would just pop back. These guys would go, "Yeah, I lost millions of dollars. I had to shut down this, and I just got right back in the game." And here I was feeling like an absolute failure as a human being.
Mhm.
So that was, and then COVID happened, and we isolate. Can't talk to anybody, can't go see anybody, there's nobody around kind of keeping levity up.
Mhm.
2 kids in college, can't come home. Um, and then a month later, James took his life.
Mm.
So I was walking into the worst betrayal of my life, already on my knees in shame and isolation. So when I talk about what it looked like, what grief and sorrow and just abject sorrow looked like in those early days, um, it was a compounding effect for me. I was digging up out of something that was really ugly and gross that had started earlier, and then James' suicide for me was all the ground I'd ever known. It was everything I had built my life on.
Yep.
It was what I trusted more than anything. I trusted my life with him. I trusted our marriage. I trusted us as parents. That was the biggest trust I had in the world.
Mhm.
And I really didn't know how to walk in the world after that.
Yeah.
I was shattered.
Yeah. And you probably heard from people. I know this one always got me, or still does to this day, where people say, "Well, I don't know how did you survive that? How did you come through that? You're such a strong person." And my comment has always been, what was the alternative? I'm just curious, what else could I have done? But, that sort of thing. But yeah, I mean, the other thing that I wanted to comment, and I made myself a note as you were talking, is I get a lot of people that ask me when they're new to the grieving process, when's it going to get back to normal? When am I going to feel like I did?
Yes, most. Yeah.
And I always feel like I'm just deflating your balloon when I say there is no going back. There's just this new reality. There's no, you can't go back to that life that you were just describing, it's not there anymore, right? It's not, you can't rewind time, and you can't change your memory of what it's like to survive all those things that you're describing and so on. So I think that's one of,
I like to talk about it is the question I get asked the most,
yeah,
and I'm honored to be able to walk alongside so many survivors these days because I have put myself out there at, started a podcast a year and a half ago. I'm only a year behind you.
yeah,
And I just wanted to open up the spaces for people to share their stories. It doesn't have to be my story, but what I've learned in my story is that every single person on this earth is suffering and surviving something.
yes, yes,
It doesn't have to be the suicide of a spouse. And so I just wanted to open up a space, just like you have, to talk about survival journeys. And then there came the book, and now there's the speaking tour, and so it all sort of, and now I'm coaching. But anyway, all that to say, I'm so honored to get to hear these stories and to get to walk alongside people who are suffering so deeply. They do always, always, always say, when will this end? How long will this pain last? And the way I've learned to think about it, and as you said, 5 years in, I'm still pretty much a newbie at this. I think of grief, um, it doesn't ever go away. I think about recreating and rewriting the story of my life that I am in the process of doing right now. And it's like I hold grief in one hand. It's like grief is one cup.
right,
And that cup doesn't ever go away.
right.
That cup always has to be held. And then in the other hand is what am I trying to become on the other side of the woman in the mirror? How am I rewriting the story? I do think the cup of grief gets easier to hold,
It does.
but it doesn't ever go away.
Nope, nope. You become used to it. I used to talk about it as in like grief had a chair at the table, right? So no matter what I'm in the middle of, that's there. I can't ignore it. I can't try to move it. I can't try to get rid of it. And the more I try to, the harder it becomes. So yeah, I think for me, my experience and my experience in working with other people who've been at it for as long as I have with deep grief is it's like a wound or like a scar, I guess, and you're just growing around it, right? Or like well, just whatever. Like you see a tree that's got something that whatever. It's just that thing that just keeps going and going and going, but it just becomes part of who you are and what you know life is about, and you change. I mean, and it doesn't have to be all bad. I mean, I've changed in ways that, oh my goodness, I'm so thankful that I've made these changes. But would I go back in time and want to relive some of my grief experiences? No, I wouldn't. I would.
Mhm.
They've made me who I am, and I'm happy with who I am. So there's that. I can try to make peace with it. So that's kind of I get what you're saying with that cup, that darn cup. You can't stick it in the cupboard and forget about it. It's got to keep on coming along, but it just becomes your I don't know your kindred spirit. That's just part of who you are. So yeah,
I also like to say, and sometimes it's way too early in the grief process, but I will say it to your audience just as a hopeful point. Um, I've also learned, and I will say I probably didn't hear this calling or this voice for the first year and a half, maybe two. But I believe now, just like what has happened in your life so beautifully and what you've done with it, um, grief also comes with an invitation.
mm,
It comes with an invitation to, it's just like I said, so what are you going to do with this? Who do you want to be on the other side of this? Do you want to always just sit in this and weep and cry and feel victimized? Or do you want to take this as an invitation to rewrite?
right.
And I do believe every single person who's suffering from something, that invitation is there whispering
Yeah,
and waiting to see what you're going to do with your life on the other side of it.
yeah. No, I completely agree with that. So, kind of, what was the reasoning for starting to write the book? What was it that you wanted to do when you started to write the book?
It's an interesting thing when you put yourself out there to do a podcast, but you're really not about talking about yourself. You're interviewing other people, right? And so the feedback consistently was, we want to know more about you. We want to know more about your story. And I really didn't want to just sit in front of the camera and tell the story. That really wasn't what I was about. And I also, kind of like you in writing your autobiography, um, there were parts of the story that only I knew,
Hmm.
you know, and I wanted my children to have that. not in a gruesome way, but
Right, right.
there was, and there are a lot after something like a suicide happens in a family, there are always stories around it.
Mhm.
And if you're the only person there in the room, if you're the only person who found him, if you're the only person who kinda took that forward, I wanted my children to have the story from my lens
Mm,
forward. That was one piece of it. But maybe more importantly than that, um, I worked really hard, really very intentionally hard at figuring out what the tools were that helped me in the tiniest little ways or in huge ways, but mostly they were small moves, that then added up to bigger moves. But
mhm,
I wanted to share them because I've read a ton of grief books and, a lot of other stories, and everybody just does it a little differently.
mhm.
And I felt like the way that I could honor James the most was to honor his life by giving to others the tools that helped me survive.
Right.
So that was the impetus for the book. Was the first 2 chapters, yes, tell the beginnings of the story, but from there on in, every chapter is a survival tool.
Yeah.
So that was the method.
So it's almost like a workbook along with being a book kinda thing? It's like there's tips and
I
tools?
don't have journaling in it, but I do have tools, and at the end, there's an addendum that, recaps those tools. I also do a recap on the poets and the singers and the authors, the thinkers who influenced me in coming up with those tools.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. And your podcast is the Soul Talks podcast, so what kinda topics are you talking about on your podcast?
It's for everybody of every age and background, and it is about survival stories, and it runs the gamut. And it's really interesting because I think a lot of times in life we just fit into the place that we think our Lego fits into. And when you open it up as broadly as tell me your story, tell me what you're surviving,
Right, right.
it's pretty beautiful the commonality that happens,
Yes,
you
yes.
know? I was interviewing a woman a couple of weeks ago. I haven't aired her podcast yet. And I mean, you talk about survival, like gut wrenching survival. She's the child of a pimp and a prostitute, came into this world with everything stacked against her. Um, you know, I just sit in awe at the tenacity and the courage of the human spirit.
Mhm.
And so every time I interview somebody, I'm on a high. And I'm just so grateful to get to hear these stories, get to tell these stories,
Yeah.
and they, they s I know you've kind of alluded to this too, and I didn't expect it in the podcast world, but, I really was putting it out there for others, and I went in tentatively. I didn't even have my name on it because of what had happened in the jewelry business. I just didn't wanna get canceled on social media again, and so, I didn't even have my name on it, but my motivation was very pure. But then what happens is every time I get in front of somebody just like you, they heal me. They help me with my journey, and that's just been beautiful.
It's so powerful, and I don't you probably have the same experience I do where people will reach out to you after they've listened to one of your podcasts and really tell you how much it resonated with them because of some, mirroring of their own story, and it always I love when people do that, so anybody who is listening, if you have feedback like that, I love to hear it personally. Because it's like, "Oh my gosh, there's another soul in this world that really, truly got something
Yeah.
from that person sharing their story, and it wasn't just, we're not here for shock and awe at all. It's just exactly. It's like just, the healing part of it. And I happen to know from my own experiences that sharing my story and talking about it is a huge part of the healing process. And if I hadn't done that, but balled it all up inside or tried to pretend like it didn't happen and stick that cup of grief in the back cupboard and say, you're not coming back out again. I don't know health wise, mentally and physically where I'd be today because that's just so not wasn't able to move forward in that way at all.
Yeah, I'd love to speak to that for a minute. I'm in 100% agreement, and I think one of the places and I felt this so powerfully. I had shame coming out of the jewelry business. I was isolated because of COVID. I lost everything I understood about life, so I'm sitting in shame and isolation and betrayal and sorrow and all the stuff. One of the things I learned, because I did not do this well at all. The first year and a half, almost 2 years, I sat in that isolation. Yes, COVID, exacerbated it,
Sure.
but I did not wanna reach out. I did not wanna talk about it. I did not wanna share my story. I I didn't want people saying, "Why? Why did you do it? Didn't you know? Couldn't you have prevented it?" I didn't wanna talk about my shame, my failure that I was perceiving as a failure in the business, and that's what I think if I could give any tiny little encouragement to anybody suffering, it is please don't stay in isolation.
No.
Please reach out to people you trust, not just splattering, but if you have friends, one friend is enough. And if you have family who's supportive, because just like you said a minute ago, if you share your pain every time you share it,
Mhm.
it lessens its power.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when you can walk outside of isolation, I believe another thing that begins to happen in our spirits is that instead of being wrapped up in self-judgment, which I was completely in, you begin to have a little more self-acceptance because in sharing that pain, the person on the other side is usually pretty compassionate. And
Yep.
so you begin to see yourself not as such a terrible, horrible human being, but beginning to accept, okay, yeah, I've got shame coming out of this, but it wasn't really all my fault. I built this amazing business and let's applaud the successes of it, even if it only lasted 12 years.
Right.
So you reshape it with self-acceptance, and, that just seems to be a natural affect of sharing our pain and coming out of isolation, so that's one of those places, one of those tools I would just encourage anybody. Share your pain, please.
It's so true, and I also would like to hear your thoughts on what listeners who are they have someone in their life who's maybe going through a really bad thing, like either the business loss, the death, suicide, any of those things in and of themselves, kinda what can they do? What would you recommend they do? What would have been helpful to you or was helpful to you or not helpful to you during that time as far as how to reach out? How do you help someone? Because I mean, I know in my life, I had many, many friends who've shared with me, we had no idea what to do. We just don't know what to do. So how do you tell someone what to do without me being in the midst of it having to tell, "Well, you could do this and you could do this," but what are some ideas you have?
Yeah, there is, there was a wonderful man, a Buddhist monk, and he died a couple of years ago. His name, was Thich Nhat Hanh, and he wrote a lot about generous listening. And to me, the thing that any of us can do for anyone in our lives who is in pain, loss of job, loss of you know, a marriage, loss of a spouse, a child, loss of identity, all those things, because at some point we're suffering a lot of them. If you have somebody who can be just a generous listener, they don't need to have advice. They can't fix it. But when they listen, they do carry your pain with them. So if you can find someone to be a generous listener, or if you can be a generous listener, to me, that's one of the most important gifts we can give.
Yes, and to that, I mean, you stated this, but I wanna emphasize this. You don't have to be trying to solve something or whatever. Just listening is helpful. I'm a big fan of Brené Brown. I'm sure you've heard of her. She
Oh,
this great video that I showed
her,
my
her words. Yes.
on the difference between sympathy and empathy, and, it is such a powerful little video to watch to show, we don't have to try to make it better. For example, when my son died, I had somebody at his funeral say to me, "At least you have other children," as if losing a child was like losing a pair of shoes. Yeah, I have a closet full of shoes, and if one of them goes missing, I'm not gonna miss it that much, even my favorite pair. But my child was a different story. When my husband passed away, I had someone at the funeral say to me, "Well, at least you're young enough to, find a new partner." And I thought, like, I'm looking for one here in the funeral home. Let's see. I mean, it was just in hindsight, I could say really stupid, almost senseless comments, but people want to help. They think they're helping. So when you come up with that, at least you, that's the sympathy part, not the empathy part. So rather than try to say, well, at least you're young and oh, Teresa, at least you could do this, but no. Instead, listen and listen with that empathy and just listen, no judgment. You can't make it better. You can't fix it. You can't make it go back to the way it was. It's kind of the hardest thing I think for people who've never really been through abject grief, just don't understand when you talk to someone who has, is you can be in their space without, I mean, harming anything. You don't have to talk about other kids. Just shut up. Listen.
Exactly, please. No, I didn't get all of those because I did not lose a child, and I think that pain is just beyond explanation. I think it's hard to be a generous listener because we are wired, I think, especially as Westerners. I think there's so much of the Eastern culture that sits more in stillness and quiet and meditation and tends to listen a little quieter. We do want to fix it,
Yeah.
especially if things we're just designed to fix, I think.
Mhm.
So I don't think being a generous, compassionate, active listener is easy. One of the phrases I have learned that I think is helpful is just to say to the person on the other side, how can I be here for you today?
Mhm.
That you need from me today, and let them let you in.
Mhm.
I need you to go to the grocery store for me. I need you to run a hot bath and light some candles and take care of my kids for a minute, you know. But usually those of us in grief can say something. If you say, how can I be there for you
Mhm.
today? We'll give you something. Make me some coffee. I'm so exhausted. I can't even make my own coffee.
Mhm. Yep. Yep. And to be open to whatever those things are. So if it's pick my kids up from school, take my dog for a walk, do my laundry. I mean, things that
Mhm.
may sound like not very glamorous things, but as we talked about before we started the show, all that life keeps going on, and you just have to keep on doing that stuff. I still have to feed my kids. I still have to walk the dog. I still have to do the laundry. Right? And so some of those real practical things I think are super helpful for someone to just jump in and say, "What can I help you with today?" Or bring some food or whatever, whatever. Just think of practical things. Don't just come and say at least you have something else still there. Just don't
Yeah.
don't do that. Don't do that. I love that. Be a generous listener. I think I wrote that down because I absolutely love that concept. So, we are going to put a link to your podcast as well as your book in the notes for this show, so people can find you, your show, and your book. I am looking forward to looking at your book myself, um, and so on. But is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners today before we end?
Oh gosh. I would say I I think in grief, I think in any kind of survival, we're always looking for what's down the road
Yeah.
and when we'll be over it or better or so much better and I would say to you, if you're listening to this podcast, you've already come so far because you're seeking help. And
Mhm.
I'll say celebrate the little wins. Celebrate how far you've already come.
Yes.
Really look at the fact that you're standing up. You turned this on. You're
Mm.
seeking help. And I would say to your listeners, celebrate today.
Yeah. Yeah. That's very powerful. Very powerful. I love that. Well, Teresa, thank you so much for being my guest today. It has been an absolute pleasure to chat with you and to learn from you. As I always do from every one of my guests, I learned something and I really appreciate your time.
Well, I've been honored. And again, thank you for what you do.